Hey everyone, thank you so much for
Oh,
tuning
wow.
in Monday. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1065th New Social Environment. I'm Eleanor, Programs Associate here at the Rail, and today I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC for a conversation featuring Dieter Schwarz, Barbara MacAdam, John Newman, Roger White, and Will Heinrich. Now I'll introduce our guests and host for today. Dieter Schwarz is an independent curator and author based in Zurich. Schwarz has been the curator and author of numerous exhibitions and publications on art from early modernity to the present day. He's currently co-curating the retrospective Gerhard Richter, 60 Years, to be held at Fondation Louis Vuitton in Paris in 2025. Barbara MacAdam is an editor, writer, and curator and editor-at-large here at The Rail. She's written numerous catalog essays in the book, New York's New and Avant-Garde Art Galleries.
Oh, I forgot
John
that.
Newman is an artist living and working in New York. He's had over 51 person shows and participated in numerous group exhibitions in galleries and museums throughout the US and internationally. Roger White is an artist who lives and works in Vermont. He has had solo and two-person exhibitions at Labor Mexico City, Grice Bench Gallery, LA, Riverside Art Museum, and Rachel Uffner Gallery. He's the co-founder of the contemporary art journal and publishing imprint Paper Monument, and is also the author of The Contemporaries, published by Bloomsbury in 2015. And our host today, Will Heinrich, reviews gallery shows, museum exhibitions, and art fairs for the New York Times, as well as writing artist obituaries. He's also written for The New Yorker, New York Observer, and Hyperallergic, among other publications. His most recent novel, The Pearls, was published in 2019 by Elective Affinity. Thanks so much for being here with us today, everyone. And it's now my great honor to pass it over to you, Will, to get us started.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Eleanor, and thank you, Rail, for having me do this, whatever this is. I thought I would say a few sentences about Bob Moskowitz, who I gather was called Bob. That'll be my first question. But say a few sentences about him, just in case anyone's tuning in who doesn't know his work or doesn't know his basic bio. He was a painter, and we're talking about a show of his work curated by Dieter at Peter Freeman Gallery. He was born in Brooklyn in 1935. His father had a couple of dry cleaning stores, but left the family. And then apparently his mother was not too reliable either, so Bob spent a lot of his youth looking after a younger sister. He didn't go to college. He trained as a mechanical draftsman and got a job at Sperry Gyroscope on Long Island. But Sperry had a program to send its employees for further training when it was arguably germane to their jobs. And Bob went to Pratt, where he studied with Robert Rieschenberg and Adolf Gottlieb and got a taste of fine art for art's sake, quit his job, rented a studio. He spent some time in Europe, but basically from that point on, as I understand it, he was a professional artist with some highs and some lows in terms of making a career of it. He was in the 1961 show, I'm sorry, I'm not going to remember, the Art of Assemblage at MoMA, and had a show with Leo Castelli in 1962. And then he and Castelli didn't agree on the direction of his work and parted ways. And then in 1978, he was in New Image Painting at the Whitney, which was also an important show. So he had these some very big moments, some other moments when he was driving a cab to get along. And all the way through it, he was making what I would consider fairly conceptual paintings. He started out with the first move he made. And please correct me, by the way, I'm the neophyte on Mr. Moskowitz, so I hope any of my panelists will feel entirely free to interrupt and correct me when I say something wrong or incomplete. But I think the first big move he made, or the most attention-getting move he made to begin with, was gluing window shades to canvases, the window shade paintings. he went on to make more conventional paintings in the sense that they're just paint on canvas, but they're always expressing a kind of a very interesting kind of ambivalence about abstraction and figuration, about what a painting is, what an image is, what a painting can be. And I think we'll talk about that. My first question, though, before we talk about his art, I grew up about 4 blocks from his loft, and I'm sure we passed each other on the street any number of times. I think we may have been in the same room once or twice at a show at Carrie Schuss Gallery, which was 4 doors down from his loft on Leonard Street. As far as I can remember, though, I never actually met him. So I was hoping that some of the people who actually knew him would tell me what he was like in person. What kind of a guy was he? ... John, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was going to say, I knew him very, very well. So how can I say? He was a very, very dear friend of mine. So I have all kinds of things to say. But Bob was a very, very unusual guy, very idiosyncratic, very eccentric, very quiet in many ways and shy. And yet he was really funny. And he could, he liked to flirt with waitresses. I mean, he was a character. He was a complete character. And you never knew exactly what you were going to get. And in a way, I would say in that, and I can get into this later, or we all will, he was very much like his paintings in that way. I mean,
yeah, I wanted to get into that.
Subtle and bold, or I suppose would be the two things that I think really hold together. They're not in contradiction. And I think the paintings are that way, and I think he was that way.
Well, that was actually going to be my next question: is how much of his psychology, how much of his psychology you see in the paintings. I think his two best known bodies of work seem to have been the window shade paintings and the corner paintings. And in both those cases, I mean, a corner painting, he made paintings of corners of the interiors of rooms, mostly empty corners. And I think it's a really clever way to sort of bridge the gap between abstraction and figuration, because they're technically figurative paintings, but they function more like abstract paintings. You don't relate to them as pictures of spaces you can really enter all that much, or at least I don't think so. You can see that they're a space, but they're also just a very simple arrangement of basic rectangles in a single color usually. If you were to read some psychology into that, it's also a way of saying, welcome, come in, you're welcome to come in. I'm not here, but you can come in. And then similarly with the window shades, again, it's a very funny rejoinder to the idea of the figurative painting as a window into an imaginary space, but it's also, it's not exactly vulnerable or expressive exactly. I guess, John, you got the jump on me there. You said you see it in his paintings, but you see it in his other paintings? I mean,
yeah, okay.
Is my interpretation of it apt?
Well, honestly, I would say yes, except, it's the nature of language that we need to isolate these differences that are, in a sense, binary or opposite. And what is so great about Bob and Bob's paintings is I don't see those hard lines being drawn. I don't really, this idea that they're figurative, they're abstract, it sort of isolates those two things in a way that for Bob, I don't think they were isolated. I mean, I think that it was all, yes, the external world was very important to him, especially with the World Trade Center paintings, all that stuff, but it became a kind of scaffolding to paint. And I would compare him in an odd way to somebody like Ryman, in that Ryman had that famous quote, "It's never what to paint, it's how to paint." And in Bob's case, the how and the what were so simultaneous. And I think that, for example, I think the corner paintings, I agree with you, they are not a rendering of a real space. So in that, they are, quote unquote, abstract and conceptual. But Bob was just such a beautiful painter. He had to have a way to get into the paint, and that was his internal practice. And to me, I don't separate one being a priority over the other. And that's what really makes the work unusual. I don't think it's ambivalent at all. I think it's absolutely intuitive and precise.
Still, I would like to say that the Winter Shades are brilliant. And when I saw them first at Craig's Art Gallery about 5 or 6 years ago, it really triggered my desire to go to the studio and to meet the artists. But on the other hand, these paintings, they're not really paintings yet. They're assemblages, and they have a lot of the time of Jasper Johns and Rauschenberg. They have this technique. They have a kind of certain aesthetic, although they use a different imagery. They don't use the public imagery Rauschenberg used, no eagles, no parachutes, etc. It's very private to have the window shades, but it's still something which is like pre-Bob Moskowitz. And then come the corner paintings, which are real paintings. And there you see the masterful way he treats the surface. And then I think slowly, he gets into what he was. But he's not an artist who started right into what he was. It took him a long time. And if you think that at the moment of the new image exhibition at the Whitney in 1978, he was 10 years older than everybody else in that show. So he was somebody who had already made a way, whereas the other ones, Rothenberg, Schnabel, etc., they were just beginners, and he had something behind him, which in a way impregnated what he was doing, but he went through certain periods and then arrived there where we know him as Bob Moskowitz.
I think, I'm sorry, I think all the paintings that are very intimate, though. I think that sort of defines the architectural paintings, the window shade paintings, so you have a real sense that he's built his world and he's containing it too.
What do you think about the word, instead of ambivalent, non-committal?
I completely disagree. I mean, that's getting back to my idea about this idea about that he was a completely intuitive person. I mean, Bob was not, I mean, he certainly read a lot and he thought a lot, but he wasn't an analytical person. And he certainly wasn't an intellectual in that way.
Right.
It was very intuitive. And yet, again, having to do with his personality, especially his training doing draftsmanship. I mean, we usually associate with painterliness with like laying down the paint and the kind of virtuosity of that action and brush. And Bob's virtuosity comes to us in a very different way. And you don't see that kind of action of the painting. And I think he knew exactly what he was. I know that he was fixated, like he knew exactly what he wanted from each surface. And if he didn't have it, he worked it until he got it. And those surfaces, all the different realms of different kinds of surfaces, was a kind of vocabulary for him. And that's what made the painting. Yeah. So I don't see any non-committal at all. I don't see any ambivalence other than maybe his own just crazy head, which we all have. But that's why I think he's so special. And I think it's very hard to pin him down, even historically, these kind of simplistic notions that he's the bridge between abstract expressionism, minimalism, and pop art almost means nothing because he's such a particular individual. And the way sorry, go ahead.
I fully agree with this. And I mean, on first sight, when you see his paintings, maybe in a book or in a magazine, you think, oh yes, that's it. And then you're completely wrong, because you have to understand these surfaces, which seem just like monochrome surfaces. Once you go close to a painting and look at a painting, you see how lively the surface is. And just in these 70s paintings, you see there's always a corner painting below the actual surface, and there's so much going on. And this image, which seems so super recognizable, then proves really to be what it is on this lively surface. And so his paintings are almost impossible to photograph. You really lose it all. And maybe drawings, it's easier to understand what's going on the surface, because the drawings are more transparent. They show more of the actual work of the artist, and the work. In paintings, it takes a very long time to come out, that the work comes out and that you really see what it is.
Right. But I mean, you could describe that. I mean, I think I didn't mean to suggest that there's something non-committal about the way about his investment in the process of painting or his investment in a given painting, but that in terms of that there's a kind of there's a slow conceptually a kind of gradual progress or process. I think you were suggesting this, Dieter, that it took him a while to develop, a while to find his way to what he was doing, you know, and he didn't again, I feel weird talking about a man I didn't know. To people who knew him, it's a strange situation, but to judge it just from the work.
But you have an experience with the paintings, Will. I think that that's completely justified.
Okay.
To talk about. I mean,
thank you. Well, but that, I mean, that gets the question. I think he could be a fully committed artist, but then, you know, fully committed artist doing the only thing he could do in his place at the moment, and it's fully felt a brilliant solution to his particular impulses and circumstances. But then if you look at them from the outside, I think it may also still make sense to say, oh, it happens between these two other movements. You know, it's two discrete ways of looking at the thing from a, you know, subjective place where you're empathizing with his process of making it, or from a, you know, not objective, more like objective place where you're trying to take a broader view. But
well, that's because you're looking at it from the outside, which is totally justified.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
I guess my point a little bit is there are artists who do this. Bob was not one of them. Bob was not a strategist. He wasn't thinking about like historical manipulations of like the rhythm of history, even though he was quite aware of it. But I don't think the painting was motivated by that. And that's why they're much more personal than they appear.
Yeah.
Right.
I was gonna say that sort of squares with an intuition I had about it, which was just that he's sort of coming to fruition or formation as a painter in a time where the polemical situation of painting is really intense. You know, to be a painter or not be a painter, right, is to commit ideologically to a lot of different things, or so we think. And so they seem like they're very unargumentative paintings, if that makes any sense, as opposed to like Frank Stella's early work, where it's painting as position paper on formalism or something. But it does seem that, like, even if it is intuitive, or maybe because it's intuitive, it also seems you couldn't find a sort of a practice more designed to confound contemporary understandings of differences between things, you know, like sort of that they're not abstract, but they're not illusionistic, or they're sometimes almost as if he's thumbing his nose perhaps at the terms of the debate around painting that would be happening in those sort of early years. And I mean, I'm really interested in, you know, that not that it's non-committal, but that it is kind of carving up some sort of like paradoxical space within, you know, what would have been thought of as the really relevant distinctions between things. I don't know if that squares with.
I think paradoxical is a really good word. You know, you know, I think we have to realize that, like, as much as we are talking about the material manifestation of how he comes to the image, and that image is nameable, but it's fictional. It's completely fictional. And that's one of the things that makes it, sort of, as Roger says, the opposite of a polemic. Even though he was quite aware of all those things, but I don't think that's the way he rolled. You know, it just different. It was a different approach, certainly a different approach than Frank Stella. Even though I know he admired Stella and he knew Stella, but you know, they couldn't have been more different. And I think this idea, it's almost like a novelist. You know, like he's creating a familiar space, but it's absolutely fictional. That's on the external side, but the way he gets to it is through this very deep internal process. Like, I don't know if you could pull up the painting of the leaf painting so quickly, but the leaf painting, which I knew, and I didn't really even see this until I was at Peter's show. To the left of the leaf, you can't see it here. I never noticed this before. There are these funny little, like, dried water drops And you don't see it, but it's as if he painted the wind. He had that kind of delicacy and that kind of unconscious way that the process itself made the image, and vice versa. And I just thought that was so beautiful, and the subtlety of it all is it reveals to you over time. It's not a pop-up, it's not immediate, even though it is immediate. And that's sort of the beauty of that juggle.
And if you look at this painting again, you see that below there's a corner painting. There's always something behind, which is almost not visible, but it's there. And you see it has been there before. And with oil paint, of course, you can go over it and put another layer. But the presence of the former painting is important. And as you had mentioned Stella before, I mean, I think that Moskowitz's painting is just the contrary of that credo of the 1960s, that it's only, you see only what is there, you can see just what is there. Because with Bob, it's always like the contrary. If you think of this Red Cross painting, once you have the Red Cross on white, and then you have the Red Cross on white painted in black and white. So the black and white can mean the Red Cross on the white. So a painting, an image can mean it's contrary. It refers to what is not there or what has been there. So I think you have to bear that in mind when you look at these seemingly simplistic images.
That is interesting. Maybe we can politely settle on the word ambidextrous instead of ambivalent. Dieter, can you say something about, oh, I'm sorry, Barbara, you want to say?
I was just going to say, I'm overwhelmed by the sort of sense of his introspection, that he doesn't actually reveal a lot, but you're conscious of introspection and trying to focus closely on whatever the subject is and doing it through the details. In the leaf painting, the right side has the incomplete edge, the white edge.
Oh, yeah.
And it's really striking because when you see it at the end, it seems you turn your attention to that, even though initially you're looking at the leaf. Anyway, I don't know where I'm going with that, but I do think that is very sort of psychological.
I think that's a wonderful point. I think that connects also, to me, I think in a way you could say they're about consciousness. It seems that that's a way of connecting to what John said earlier, that the image is a way for him to get into the painting. And leaving as Dieter said, the corner is still behind the leaf. Leaving the corner there visible is a way of being faithful to the initial thought. It's a way of kind of putting down the process of consciousness that resulted in the painting without fictionalizing that. It's a sort of true fiction in that sense. Makes me think of, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that unfinished edge that Barbara is referring to, this connects to what you're saying, is both a kind of sign of pain, a self-consciousness about a painting and how a painting's made and what a painting is. And at the same time, it's this mysterious place for the leaf to go, that we don't know where it's going to go. And those two things are not separated from each other. They are bonded, intrinsically bonded in a way that I think is very different than a lot of other paintings, particularly even new image paintings. I mean, I think he's the real pioneer of that movement, firstly, but secondly, I think he was doing something that it's subtle, but it's very rich, and it's completely the opposite of the big bang of what's expected with, let's say, pop art.
In this leaf painting, this white spot Barbara pointed to is almost loud. If you're a few meters away from this painting, it calls you and it invites you to get closer. And then you get closer and you see the structure and you see then this leaf. And at the same time, you lose the control. You cannot grasp the whole surface. It's like Barnett Newman. You have to go close and then you immersed in this kind of huge surface. And I think that's important that all these paintings are so large, so tall, that you cannot grasp them at once you're standing close to the image. And if they were smaller, they would completely change their meaning. But the extension they have is really an important part of the painting.
Yeah, he does a lot with size and also shape of canvas. I was going to bring up later the Atlas painting at the front of the show. It's can we? I've lost her in the Eleanor. Can we bring that one up? It almost to me the Atlas almost looks like a hood ornament. You know, it's almost like a windshield proportions, or a movie screen, or you know, or some sort of not quite sunglasses, but it's some kind of visor. It's interesting to me that in this shape of canvas, you're looking at, it's as if he's presenting you not with a vista that you can look over or choose your place with, you know, enter at any place, but it's like this is what you're seeing. You know, this is not an arena in which you can choose to look at different points. This is your view.
But also the view is larger than the image itself. So the view, what the image really is.
Well, the image,
thing.
do you mean by image, you mean the Atlas thing?
Atlas, yes. I mean, each painting, there's an image, but the whole painting is the image, right? There's a
right, exactly. Yeah.
He actually paints a place.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a place for painting, and it's a place for things he either sees or is thinking about having to do with the external world.
Well, it's a mental, I mean, I think it's a conceptual place, or a mental place, or a hypothetical place. I mean, the place of painting, it makes reference to the external world and reference to the mind, but it's its own separate thing.
It's a metaphor.
Yeah.
For the position of the viewer, for the position of the person who looks at it in the world. I mean, it's a metaphor for that. And so it's always about you looking at it.
Right. Right. Or it's about being looked at. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then the drawings, the way that the buildings, my favorite body of work in this show, at least, is the drawings of the skyscraper drawings, and the way that the shapes, the silhouettes of the skyscrapers relate to the shape of the paper is always, or the canvas is always very interesting. You know, there's always just enough space around the building that you can see it clearly, but there's a way in which the shape of the building kind of implicates the shape of the paper, or vice versa, so that they become, it's like taking up this, you know, the idea that the whole thing is the image. You have the small figurative element, but the whole thing is the image. It takes that up to another level in a way.
Interestingly, these are two canvases. I mean, he could have chosen to use one canvas, but he wanted two canvases, which changes completely.
Totally. Two canvases jammed right together. It's as if, I think that supports the idea that the whole thing is the image. I wanted to ask
wait, I just want to say one more thing. Let's not forget that all the World Trade Center paintings were painted before the World Trade Center came down. And if you look at some of I actually own one, and I know from people who come to my house, and there's several in Peter's show, Peter's show, of white World Trade Center with a kind of smoky in between. And so many people who I know have been to, and I have one sort of like that. Let's see if you're coming up to it. No, this 11, number 11, maybe. Yeah. So many people, and I have a painting somewhat similar to that, and people who come over always assume that it's a painting of his prescient idea of the World Trade Center either being smoked or bombed or crumbling. So there's something really interesting there about.
What year is that drawing?
The one I own is 1991. I'm assuming this is the same period because it's the same size.
So it was before the first terrorist attack on the World Trade Center even. That's interesting. Barbara, you're gonna?
No, I didn't.
Oh.
I was saying 97.
Oh, that one is 97. So it's after there was one. There had been one attack already. I wanted to ask Dieter to say something about how this show was organized, because I think it's interesting that Bob covered a lot of different subject matter. He had a lot of discrete bodies of work and kind of a peripatetic trajectory in terms of work making, I think. But the show feels very, even like, you know, it gives a sense of the range, but also feels very dense and singular. I'd be curious what your intention was in terms of representing his work.
Well, you know, a show is always a coincidence of the space which there is, and the material which there is. And by coincidence, there was the Wrigley painting coming back from a private collection to be sold. And also by chance, there were these two cross paintings. So I thought, I cannot avoid to show the Wrigley painting. This would be just too bad. And so I thought, we have four walls. So let's give one wall to the 70s, one wall to the 80s, one wall to the 90s, and one wall to the 2000s. And this creates a structure. And within this structure, you cannot hang too much, but at least 2 or 3 or 4 paintings for each decade. And having chosen such a structure, the exhibition starts growing. For the 70s, there was not so much to choose from. From the 2000s, there was much more. And so I tried to create a balance. And as the gallery has this first space, which is a bit smaller, I thought, well, there have to be drawings too, as the drawings are like really the counterpart of Bob's paintings, and not just a side way, but they are really such an important part of the work. And then in the studio, I had seen several times this incredible wall, which he had done for his own pleasure. And a few people have seen it, and I thought this has to be recreated. But again, the space has to work. And luckily, the wall in the gallery had about the same size as the studio wall. So we could transpose the studio wall to the gallery. And you need this kind of situation. So at times you're lucky, at times you're not so lucky. But in this time, we were really lucky to be able to go ahead like this. And so I think the show is quite balanced between this impact of the drawings on one hand, and then this quiet space with this selection of paintings. And I hope that works all together.
But one thing though that I felt was I would have liked to have seen, but as Dieter said, maybe you couldn't get the work. In the early, late 70s, there was a group. I know Roger talked about this when we all had our meeting. He talked about the Cadillac chopsticks painting. There were a number of paintings where the image, this kind of odd juxtaposition of images, and there was a lot of bright color, the retirement painting, the teapot painting, where the image really was something. It wasn't a building. It was like these very specific choices of images, almost working like a poet, you know, these kind of putting these odd things together, like the retirement painting has a cane, but then there are these like 3 like stripy symbols. You're not sure if it's an ideogram for something or it's some abstract conceit. You notice in the Wrigley building, he's got this funny little dashes that you don't see immediately, these white little things coming out on the side, and this funny little thing up at the top, which clearly he changed it's a line, and he changed it from horizontal to vertical, but he lets you see the scumble. I mean, everything is so intentional, even if it looks like it's an accident. I mean, that's part of like the tension and the brilliance of the thing, you know.
But you know, basically, it should have been just a show with a selection for work at the studio, and these works which were at the gallery by chance, then I was lucky to have them. But in order to go even further and to have a lone exhibition, this was simply not the intention for a gallery show. And of course, I would have liked to have a 5th wall, a 6th wall, a 7th wall, and an 8th wall. But they were not there. I think it had to be enough. It had to be very concentrated. And then I think we have such an unusual work like the cave painting, which has been rarely seen. And so I think there were some surprises even for the connoisseurs among the visitors.
I went back over the weekend and did a little Moskowitz bibliography diving because I was curious about how the work would have appeared in consciousness at the time it was made, and found some wonderful things from around the time of the New Image show. In particular, Vivian Rayner reviews that exhibition in the Times in December, 1978 and talks about this painting and says Robert Moskowitz has the makings of an apocalyptic vision, which I thought was a very interesting descriptor for something like this, as in the picture of the Wrigley building on its ear. And he also has a feeling for grand space. She went on to mention something that I also thought was just fascinating. She said he wavers distractingly between an expressionistic and mechanical paint surface. So that was how this sort of reads in that moment. And of course I thought, well, that's, it's precisely that sort of wavering between those two things that is what's sort of left over from that time period and makes the work kind of go forward and be fruitful for sort of subsequent generations of painters, because it's precisely that sort of sense of wavering between those two poles that creates an interest that I think exceeds other sort of pop paintings that might be done in a style which was more sort of top down or considered or coherent in a way. It's those sort of leftovers that I think are really good. Another thing that I wanted to throw out there is in 1981, Roberta Smith wrote about a show of his that I don't think was in New York. I think it was up in Yonkers, perhaps, or sort of not in Manhattan. And she described Moskowitz as a non-painter's painter who refuses to give in to painting, and later says that his work has a furtive painterliness that slowly reveals itself. And I thought that was such a interesting way to describe this, that sort of like there's a sense of withholding or sort of furtiveness about the work. And I wondered, because it doesn't seem to gel with, John, what you're saying about his sensibility.
But I think that's you need a certain sort of temperament to be comfortable with a wavering like that, and there's it's like, if you don't happen to know him personally, like John can say everything was totally intentional, but if I don't know him and I walk in the gallery and I'm looking at it, I don't think there's necessarily a way that I can know that it was intentional. I can posit that it's all intentional. And I mean, usually personally, as a critic, I tend to posit that everything's intentional on the thinking that, it's the artist's responsibility, that it's all intentional ex officio in a sense, whether or not it was literally consciously intentional when they did it.
That's an important point.
Yeah, but you don't know, and so you have to be comfortable with a kind of uncertainty. But I mean, I think there's a difference in emphasis in the way she's putting it, but she's describing the same thing, that he's, and I would stick to my point that he has one foot in one place and one foot in another place, and whether you want to, I mean, maybe, John, your objection to that is that it seems to privilege the places where he has his feet instead of him as the person who's standing astride them, but it's just a question of point of view, whether the two things are mechanical versus painterly or abstract versus figurative or whatever it is.
Well, I don't mean to say when I use the word intentional, I mean that he resolved the picture in exactly the way he wanted to ultimately. Let's say all the thumb marks and everything around the thinker. Obviously, they're not all intentional. They're, procedural. They're in the act of making. But if it didn't work out the way he wanted it to look, he would then figure out another way to go about it. So
right.
Maybe this is just like my own little bugaboo about being an artist, but like, I don't see these separations. I understand the separations are important because that's the only thing language avails to us so that we can be clearer. But it's not like that in the making of the painting. And I think that often we think of action and procedure as being so intuitive that it's sort of a transcendent state. And, it is to a degree, but I think one doesn't think of that with Bob's work because it seems so apparently simple or precise or carefully delineated. And I just as intuitive and felt, just in another kind of temperature.
Mm-hmm. Do you know how he? I had wanted to ask how he. What was the thing for him, if you know, that got him into making art in the first place? Because he may have been interested in it all his life, but from what I understand, from what I read, he didn't consider it as something he could pursue until Sperry Gyroscopes sent him to Pratt. And I wonder if anybody knows what his experience was that pushed him over the line.
I know he loved Gottlieb. Gottlieb was a really important figure for him. And I think also going to London, when he went to London, I think that also gave him an incredible opportunity. But I actually don't really know the answer to that.
Okay, fair enough. I have a different question prepared. I wanted to look at, it's not in the slideshow, but when I was doing research for his obit, I came across two drawings. I guess they're drawings, I think they're pastels, that really struck me as a Mondrian fan. Oh no, I'm sorry, it's one pastel and one oil painting, I think. He did a red mill and then a black mill. And the red mill is not exactly the same as Mondrian's red mill, but to my eye, it's close enough that it's kind of functionally the same thing. It's a very struck me as a very direct, very kind of one-to-one reference. And then he made a painting of it in black. We're just wondering what it means to, and then he's also done the what is it, the fresco, Italian fresco.
Diver.
The diver, thank you.
Yeah.
Done the diver. What does it mean? I was just thinking about what the difference is between painting a building, painting the Wrigley building, for example, painting some recognizable object that's not quite an artwork, and painting someone else's artwork. Is, if he makes a pastel of the red mill, is that a work of appropriation, or is it a piece about the Mondrian piece, or is it again just a way of getting into it, that he liked that design and it allows him to work with pastels at that moment? These are questions I have. If anyone has thoughts.
I don't think about appropriation. I think he transforms certain images, be it images of an artist, like also Brancusi's sculpture, or Giacometti's sculpture, or the Rodin sculpture, or the Mondrian, as you say quite rightly, or the Paestum diver. He transforms them into a sign. It's not the actual artwork anymore. It's not transformed. It's so clearly marked by his own personality, by his own work, that it becomes something else. It has a reference still, but it becomes another metaphor for something else. Who knows what the Brancusi bird is now for him? But I think it's far from the ideas of the appropriation generation. It's another.
Right.
Also, when they were painted, this was before the appropriation conversation even came up.
Right.
Well, nothing to be. He certainly wasn't conscious or self-conscious about that. I think Dieter's point about the sign, like, I think we have to think about these things in a way.
But like, if you're, sorry, can I stick in one thing before you? But it's a sign made from a sign rather than a sign made from another object. That's what seems notable to me and worth pursuing. What does it mean to make a sign out of another sign rather than a sign out of any other kind of object?
You can manipulate this sign. You can give it a proportion, a dimension, a color. I mean, the Wrigley building is maybe the one image which is most literally taken, because from this matchbook, where he saw this advertisement image of the Wrigley building, which is already stylized into a silhouette, he quite literally takes it. Whereas the Rodin, for instance, he changes a lot the actual outlook of the sculpture. But the Wrigley building, then he's able to manipulate it, to put it on the side, to go around with it, and just to work with it. It's his image. It has become his image, and it's something completely personal then.
I think he's also furnishing his world, and with the kind of design quality that he takes all these objects and all these references and puts them in his architecture.
I also think it's worth noting that, I mean, I didn't actually think about the Mondrian connection to the Red Mill, although I think it makes sense. But he only painted sculpture. He didn't paint paintings. I mean, even the wall of Paestum is kind of, it's a wall. So I think that it's the way he thought of like the sculptures and the buildings. There's something connected there. The other thing I wanted to say about that red mill, which is on the cover of his retrospective catalog from the Museum of Modern Art, when I was looking at it, I was also looking at the book last night. One thing about Bob that's so interesting is the paintings, the way he painted and his amazing touch is the paintings look like they grew out of the surface, as opposed to like when you see de Kooning, you really feel he's like putting the paint down on the surface. It's a very different idea and a very different experience, both physically and, if the right word would be, reading wise. And I think this idea that Dieter brings up about the sign, like you have to think about the difference between like a pictogram, an ideogram, and a logogram, these kind of graphic entities that have meaning of different sorts. They refer to something, may not be literal. And that kind of poetic extension, I think, is a really important part of the way to understand what Bob's doing, not as a rendering of the Flatiron Building.
I mean, you can see it here in these diver paintings. You have the diver, different sizes, by the way, not always in the same size. And you have the diver cut in half almost. And then you have this little red triangle or the black triangle at the upper left corner. Here you have this square at the upper left corner juxtaposed with the diver. That shows that he's thinking in terms of science and not of the real thing. Really, it's something to work with, to give it, to throw it into the image and to place it and to think about all this so precisely. When the position is always so precise, it's never just put in the center like that. It makes sense.
The starting point. Yeah, it gets back to this idea of the whole thing being the image. It's not there's no field in which something's happening. There's a kind of singular, like it's all one gestalt.
Which is why I think it's like cave painting. It
Right.
has the same kind of meaning, it's embedded and it's not completely translatable, but it evokes a sense of meaning. There's a semantic quality without having it be translatable.
Right. Well, a real cave painting is preceding all these, or we presume is preceding all these divisions of language that you're talking about. It's not a writing drawing distinction yet when you're putting a bison on the wall of a cave 35,000 years ago. Before we run out of time, can we talk about the wall of drawings in the show? Eleanor, could you bring up the wall, please? I have lots of things to say about this, but I'd rather hear what other people have to say about it, of course. But I will ask one question about it, which is so this reproduces a wall he had in his studio. And my first question was, Dieter already said that he assembled this in his studio for his own pleasure, but I wonder if we could pursue that a little bit. What function did this play in his practice, having a wall like this? Because I have so many questions about these buildings. Are they variations or repetitions? Is it a serial work? Could you call this all a single conceptual work? What's in the foreground and what's in the background? Well, jump in.
There are just three images: the skyscrapers and the Empire State Building and the Flatiron Building, just three. Right. And these drawings go over about 30 years. They start 1980 or they end about 2015 or 16. So 35 years. And I think for him, it was just important that every drawing is a single drawing. That's not a series. It's a single drawing, and how they would behave together, all these individual figures behaving together on one wall. I think that was the main idea.
Mm-hmm. So it's what makes it not a series? What does that distinction mean?
that each time it's a new approach. Each time it's like giving new life to these figures. The sign is always there. The three signs I mentioned, that the signs are there, but they get a new life with every new approach. And I think series has impressionism. We know the series of Monets. They give a certain feeling or certain mood. They try to transpose the mood of the outer world onto the canvas or on the drawing. Here, it's not the outer world. It's an inner mood which translates into these drawings.
And series are also generally self-consciously sequential. And this was not like, you know, if, for example, back to Stella, you could talk about the series is like a whole work unto itself, and each one is a variation on that larger concern. Each one of these was made as an individual work. I think what's so touching about this thing, and I saw it in his studio, is when he started getting sick and he just couldn't really get into the studio anymore to paint, although he was making drawings in a little notebook. He just left this up. And that's just what he wanted to see and just what he wanted to be there. And anyone that came to the studio, that's what he wanted them to see. And it almost has a meaning greater than its art quality. I think it's very personal and, you know, so much about the end of his life and just leaving it there, you know, for anyone to see, particularly him.
It seems absolutely like an extension of the amazing intuitive way that he had of knowing how much space things needed. I mean, and I love the idea of, you know, just that you couldn't say logically why that arrangement is the way it is, and yet it seems so conscious of the weight of the colors and the spaces and the play between repetition and variation and something that's sequential and syncopated in a way. I have a lot of, you know, Warhol feelings, which is sort of an unusual thing to realize with this work, but it sort of makes sense, and the kind of the labor and the repetition and the sort of continuing to view the same thing over and over and finding something different about it in times. And also, I mean, there's something incredibly musical about it, which brings me back to, you know, the late Mondrian and Boogie Woogie. It's a staggering thing, and I love that it's based on what he would have seen in the studio and functions as an installation in that way.
It's also a form of architectural doodling, isn't it? I mean, to get to figure out what he's going to do and just doodling.
Yeah.
But it's also like a certain kind of autobiography, 35 years of his life. And strangely enough, and in the moment when this goes over to the gallery, it's over for him as well. I mean, it's just, that is the final point. He passes away. And that's it. This wall is like the memorial in itself.
See, we're supposed to have 6 minutes left of talking. That was a pretty perfect and wonderful point to stop at, but I guess we should find our 6 more minutes. Can we pick one of these drawings and talk for a moment about how it works? Let's say let's take the blue World Trade Center, the really tall blue World Trade Center, just right of middle on the top. One question I have is, do you think it makes sense to identify a foreground and background in this drawing? In other words, are the buildings actually what he's drawing, or are they a way of cutting into and kind of lending a quality to the space around them?
Both. I mean, I you know, I think that's the point, is that I think he was aware that they're the World Trade Center, but, you know, I do think he was aware of like how to make a particular kind of picture and structure that picture. So, you know, there's something very, I don't know, kinky is too cute a word, but like the fact that he just lopped off the tiny little corner
Right.
So at the top suddenly makes it the World Trade Center.
Yeah,
Otherwise, you're
that's
thinking Barnett Newman formal,
yeah.
manipulation
that's
on the plane. It's funny. It's funny.
yeah.
It's tender. It's peculiar, and it's
Mhm.
all those things. And
That's
and it's
yeah.
very hard to like pick one and say this was, again, from Roger's point, it's not a polemic. It's not a proposition.
No, totally. I'm just trying to say something that will provoke an interesting response. I think you're right. I think it is both. I mean, this is why I like the World Trade Center ones the best personally, better than the Flatiron or the Empire State, because the Empire State Building is so recognizable. The Flatiron does something interesting in terms of depth that I think the other two don't do quite the same thing, because of its triangular facade. It's hard to read it as either flat or deep. It's unsettled in a dimension which the other two aren't quite so much. The other two translate into silhouettes better, but I think the Twin Towers are the most powerful of the three because of that tiny little corner, because they are so barely specific. They're like as minimal a gesture as you could conceive of that gives them a specific reference, which is pretty incredible.
Taking up your question about figure and ground, I think I would say there's not one answer. Maybe here they merge, but I come close to merging. Maybe in another drawing, there's just a figure on the ground very sharply. And there's not one answer to this question. It's always a question of how he does it at this moment. And it can turn around. Also, the ground can be stronger than the figures. It all changes. It's everything's possible in this field of drawings. On just three subjects you have to think, and they look like so many subjects if you look at this wall, but there's just three. They're so varied, so rich. The way they're treated, the way they're used.
It's true, and they are three. I mean, architecturally, he got an incredible range and three choices. You have three very different approaches to making a skyscraper, as well. And three very different silhouettes.
Maybe this is a little off topic, Will, but I think there are two things that I want to include. Firstly, black on black. I mean, Bob made a lot of black on black paintings. And I think that's, again, part of what I was talking about is you actually have to look into and through the painting.
Yeah.
So the whole black on black thing is an interesting subject, but this spray painting thing, that was late. That came late. And I remember when he figured it out, and I was thinking, how did you do that? And he would just take the spray can and he wouldn't spray at it. He would just sort of wave it up in the air and let it fall. And either it worked or it didn't work. But it was, again, it was so thrilling. It was kind of hilarious. It was simple, but it was very effective. All that just folds in on each other, and that's the beauty of the thing. And yet when you look at it, it just, makes so much sense. Just the night sky of the city, anybody could get that. And if you're a sophisticated painting viewer, you certainly can enter in to a very different kind of space and experience, and it's right there for you.
I love it.
Oh, this is wonderful. Flatiron.
That is a beautiful one.
Really.
There's such a wonderful, and again, it's another one of the apparent contradictions that he seems to enjoy playing in and with is the difference between something that is so specific and intentional and exactly the the sort of where the molding on the bottom of the top of the Flatiron building has to be just there so that we know it's a Flatiron, and then the idea that it's the spray paint just kind of falls where it does, and then those two things are married on the canvas in such a perfect way is really part of his sensibility, I think.
At the same time, in many of them, not in these, but you have the contrast between the external and the claustrophobic. And you feel sometimes you're caught in his, tight little corner. That's so awesome.
That was very much the way Bob was as a human too.
An interesting one.
I know
This
he was
is
a Clifford Still fan. This made me think of Clifford Still.
Yeah.
that big white line is such a wonderful move. This is a good example of, I think, of the building, the subject, the ostensible subject being a kind of pretext for a painting or drawing in its own right, because it's all about that white line.
Yeah. Well, and the jagged side. The funny thing is today, I think between Clifford Still and Philip Guston, they're taking over our consciousness for the moment. That they're everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Can we see another, Eleanor? Can we see some more?
Also, if you think about it, if you think about the jagged edge thing, as Barbara brings up, there are so many pictures that have a jagged edge.
Yeah.
And in a way, I mean, they're all identifiably, nameably different things that we know, but they're all the same.
Mm.
I mean, there's a wonderful way that Bob's work has incredible continuity. And yet they're very different identifiable things. I mean, that, you know, that's unusual.
That's a great point. Like a limited vocabulary of types of shape through which a variety of specific objects come in.
Well, in this here, for instance, the cave painting comes through, and instead of the smiley, there's just this white beam, the light.
Mm.
I think this the tower.
What's funny is in the interiors, there's a real sense of design dominating certain works, and that came to me as a surprise. But I think that was something in his world.
Well, I think that connects to his drafting.
His biography. Yeah. I mean, I think he was sent to Pratt initially to study design, if I understood correctly. Sperry Gyroscope was not paying for him to become a fine artist. They thought they were paying for him to learn graphic design and come back to Sperry Gyroscope. So.
Just
Should we take some questions?
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for this really inspiring, beautiful conversation. It's been really wonderful to hear insights on Bob's work from people who are so connected to him. So thank you for everything you've all shared. Thank you all for your questions. We do have some questions here from the audience, and maybe I'll start off with a question from Stephen, just kind of going off of the Reddit talking about design. Stephen is wondering if Bob and Milton Glaser were friends.
I'm not aware of that.
I don't know.
No idea, I'm afraid.
Cool.
It's a good question.
Thank you. Maybe something we'll look into. We will take another question from GE, but if anyone else would like to ask a question, please send a message in the chat, and we'll pass the mic over to you. GE, I'll let you unmute.
Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you all for this conversation today. Were the skyscraper paintings that he made in any way influenced by draftsman, architect, and painter Hugh Ferris's skyscraper paintings of the early 20th century?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to.
I doubt it, but I don't know exactly.
Yeah, I would also, I mean, I don't know for a fact one way or the other. I'm sorry, but I mean, just to look at his work, they seem evidently like something he arrived at through his own process of experiment and deduction. You know.
You know, he's a big fan of John Cage, Bob, and there's a great John Cage line about how I have nothing to say and I'm saying it. And in the case, I think of Bob, I'd like to say, sure, it's the Empire State Building, but it's not.
Right. That's the fun part.
That's what's so pleasing about his work. You know, it's not at all doctrinaire. It just comes there in front of you to deal with.
Thank you, GE, for that question. The next question will be from Chloe.
Thank you all so much for this conversation, which has been deeply generous and such a pleasure to listen to. I'm curious to hear from each of you about what you think repetition unlocked for Robert. I really loved what you said, John, about continuity, and I think repetition has an interesting relationship to continuity here. Repetition also allowed for certain slippages, especially given the content that Robert was working with, and I'm really curious what each of you thinks about that.
I would go, I think that, you know, repetition can be the beginning of establishing some sort of judgment on what one is doing. Like, I like this better than that. It doesn't seem like it functioned that way at all for Bob, but really just looking at the wall of drawings, one notices only in seeing them together that some of the World Trade Centers float. Some of them are on the ground, and that wouldn't be really possible, I think, without that sort of comparative thing. But what you said about generosity is also really interesting, and it's been sort of in my mind through this conversation in relation to the repetition and the sort of relatively limited set of things that he's giving us. I think often we construe repetition or generosity in painting in terms of a lot, you know, giving the viewer a lot, you know, more, and right now I think we're in such a sort of maximal moment in terms of painting, which wants to be very generous, but there's sort of a different kind of generosity that Moskowitz was doing by giving you just enough to create a world out of these few elements. I think it was quite sort of generous work, and that's related to the way that he kind of did the same thing and how slowly he moved and how little he sort of took on of the possible things that one could paint.
Yeah. I think by repeating something, you discover that you can't actually repeat anything.
I got the impression by looking at Bob's work that he's in a way trying to create a continuum, and repetition serves to create this continuum in a way like similar to the minimal music, which I liked a lot, Philip Glass, for instance, that you have this melody, you have a harmony, you have a certain rhythm, and you repeat them and you vary them, and you make sure that this continuum goes on because it's your life. It's about your life as well. It's not just formalist. It's not just a formal trick or thing. It's about really living and creating as an artist a continuum.
And also, I would include, of course, it's repetitive in that we can recognize, let's say, the themes, but I'm sure for Bob, just in the making of them, each one had to have something there that was different, because he had to have the motivation to be interested in it. And that small difference was enough to kind of make the next one and the next one. So each one in itself is quite unique. So this idea of repetition as if they're identical is false. Yet there is a continuum.
Well, you have to begin somewhere too. It gives you a whole process as you repeat.
I mean, it creates something very ecstatic in the end. If you look at this wall, it's not ecstatic in a very expressive, but it's in a very, very slow and continuous ecstatic. And this is very strong about this work.
That's
Yeah, I think you actually see the expressiveness in the wall. You see the kind of discrete expressiveness that's in all of them more clearly. It's kind of, there's something about the, you know, seeing different choices about color or treatment, a lot of them together, kind of reveals the exuberance that maybe that's happening under the surface of the larger paintings viewed one at a time, or less, maybe not under the surface, but closer to the surface, merely on the surface or something.
Thank you all so much for those answers. I'm going to pass it back over to Eleanor in case there are any other questions.
Thank you, Chloe. That was such a great question, and those were such generous responses. I think that was our last question for the Q&A today. Thank you all again so much for this. It's been such a special way to spend the afternoon. Thanks also to Anna from Peter Freeman Inc. for supporting us as we prepared for today's conversation. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring our NSE program and for supporting our archive, which you can explore on the Rails YouTube channel and where this conversation will be posted very soon. The Rail has been free and independent for 23 years. A donation directly supports our writers, production staff, and operations. You can support our work via the link in the chat. And if you're free tomorrow, join us at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for a conversation with Teresita Fernandez and Allison Glenn on the event of Soil Horizon at Lehman Maupin, New York. Thank you all so much again for the conversation. Thank you for tuning in. And you can now all turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Such a great discussion.
you.
Have a great Monday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Will. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Peter Freeman team as well. Bye,
Thanks,
everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Everybody. It was
Bye.
really, thank you.